Hello. I'm actually still in shock that I'm standing here today to speak to all of you. I'm one of those people that on a given day, if you put me in a room with highly educated people, very accomplished individuals, I just find myself intimidated. I start to shrink, and I start to convince myself that I don't belong to that club. This actually happened a year ago, the first time that I met Dr. Paul Osteen. I had attended a luncheon for medical missions where he was in attendance. I'd been invited by my friend, who's also a nurse, Morgan Fisher, who came to Malawi with me on one of our medical mission trips. She was going to introduce me to the people at her hospital who helped sponsor her trip to Malawi. I was asked to speak for about 5 minutes on our work in Malawi at a round table with people who were doing similar things. I remember listening to everybody talk about the wonderful things that they had done and what they had accomplished. And very quickly, I realized how small I was, how small our organization was, and how far we still have to go. And I wasn't really sure that we would ever get there. Nevertheless, I gave my little 5-minute synopsis of what we were doing and spent the rest of the meeting taking notes from people that knew everything that I didn't know. At the end of the meeting, I saw Dr. Paul Osteen walk towards our direction. I just assumed it was probably somebody right behind me or right next to me that he was most likely going to be speaking to because they had more important and innovative things to share with him. To my surprise, though, he walked right up to me and Morgan, introduced himself, and asked us to attend this very conference last year. He added a booth for Portawera that we could actually exhibit in the hall. It is a moment like that, and really a moment like this one today, where I'm standing on this stage, that reminds me that God reminds me that who I am is not defined by me, or people around me, or circumstances around me, but by God himself. It's because of God that a young girl who grew up in a small village in Tonje, Malawi, with no promises of a bright future, found herself in the United States of America, living her dream as a gynecological oncologist. And I'm now standing here in front of you, truly humbled and truly honored by God's grace. Even my coolest dreams when I was a kid were not this cool. I was born in Malawi, and I was the oldest of 8 children. If you're wondering where Malawi is, recently, after Madonna adopted her babies, I just tell people that's where Madonna's babies came from. And somehow that seems to change the whole geographical location of Malawi. So if you didn't know, it's where Madonna's babies came from. I spent my childhood in a small village called Tonje. Like most villages, Tonje was plagued with poverty, disease, lack of access to basic needs of life. I attended most of my primary school under a tree. The most accessible transport out of Tonje were my feet, and on a really good day, I would get a donkey cart, maybe an ox cart, and sometimes even a bicycle. I was all grown up by the time I was 10 years old, and I started assuming adult roles. This was an imperative thing for my mother to do, as it is for many mothers in Malawi. Because while death is unwelcome, it's an expected outcome for most young mothers, especially during the childbearing years. My mother had to make sure I was ready to take over the family. This is a reality for many young girls in Malawi. Meet Mary and Timothy. 3 years ago, 13-year-old Mary walked a long way from her village with her brother Timothy to an HIV clinic where her mother used to receive treatment. She came there to return the prescriptions that her mother would no longer need because she had passed away. Her brother had malaria and severe anemia, requiring blood transfusion. Mary became Timothy's mother at the age of 13. She did all the bedside care. She always made sure that Timothy would eat before she did, even if it meant she didn't get anything to eat. She literally nursed her little brother back to health. The sharp medical clinicians in the HIV clinic decided to follow up with Timothy and Mary after they were discharged, and soon realized that the children were on their own and their community would not or could not care for them. Mary was often beaten, and that smile was quickly gone. She had health problems of her own, and in despair, she stopped taking her medications, hoping that her disease would progress and end her misery. Through contact with some good missionary doctor friends, there was a happy ending for Mary and Timothy because they are now at Port Hawila, thriving and attending school. My life in Tonje had similar stories. We struggled for everything, including clean water. We shared our drinking water with cows, goats, and dogs. When the rains would fail, we would dig in the sand until we reached some water and waited hours just to fill one bucket. I still get overwhelmed when I watch my kids, who are about the same age that I was when I take them to the beach, and they're digging around in the sand for water just for the fun of it. I felt hungry most of my life. With droughts, our crops would fail and food would become scarce. I remember seeing trucks carrying bags that had red, white, and blue colors on them with corn. We would stand in long lines waiting to make it to the front of the line and hoping we would make it to the front before they ran out. And sometimes the corn would run out, and I would watch mothers with babies strapped to their backs flock to the front, sobbing and begging for any little leftover corn so they would at least just feed the babies. These were moments that I wondered if God had forgotten that there were still people living in Tonje. My dad was an educated man, and most educated people I knew chose to live in the city where things were more accessible. I never understood what my father's reasons were for always choosing the road less traveled. He would often remind me that God wanted us in Tonje, that God had a plan for us there. He would often quote Jeremiah 29:11, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future." This was always worth an eye roll from me. And I actually rewarded his sentiment by telling him I was going to refuse every marriage proposal from a boy that wanted to be a pastor. At the age of 14, I was the first student after a decade from Tonje Primary School to be selected to 9th grade with a full scholarship to a prestigious boarding school in Blantyre. I was the pride of my village and the pride of my parents. I packed my small cardboard suitcase with 3 outfits, my school uniform, and my very first pair of leather shoes, which my dad bought after selling some bags of beans at the market. When I reached Blantyre Secondary School, I realized I didn't feel like I belonged there. Most of the kids hadn't had the kind of experience that I had. They were dropped off in cars, and I had rode a bus to school, got off the bus stop, and walked right into campus with my little suitcase. It was a hard place for me to find where I belonged. I also knew, though, I needed to stay in school because this was the only place that would give me the dream of becoming a doctor, and that's the only thing I had in my hands. I decided to start looking for my dad's God, and guess what? Jeremiah 29:11. But this time it carried a weight that it never did before. I hung on to this verse, and it became my anthem through high school. This is why the Bible tells us in Proverbs 26, "Train up a child in the way that he should go, and when he's old, he will not depart from it." In 1994, Donna Ivy, an ER doctor from a small town, Poolville, Texas, came to Malawi, worked with my family, and while she was on a short-term medical missions, very quickly she realized the overwhelming lack of resources, well-trained medical personnel, and knew that in 2 weeks she couldn't make much of a difference. She realized, however, in her hands, she had money, and she had a country that could provide access to education for a little girl with a dream. On July 4th, 1994, I landed at Dallas-Fort Worth Airport with a full scholarship from Donna to attend college in the United States. It was an out-of-body experience for me. So many buildings, massive highways, 16-year-olds with cars, lots of white people. I had never seen so many white people. This was the land of milk and honey. There were huge stores called Walmart that had everything I could think of and everything I couldn't think of. They had entire stores dedicated to pets. I attended a Sunday school class with Donna Ivy, where grown women in a Sunday school class were learning the symptoms of hunger. They wanted to learn how to eat only when they were hungry so they would lose weight. Imagine my shock when I had felt hungry my whole life. After my first year of college, I went back to Malawi for a visit. As the plane was approaching Lilongwe International Airport, I looked out the window and noted the vast, empty, underdeveloped nature of my country, very different from DFW when I was landing in the United States. There were dirt roads, small huts, large open fields. My life had changed so drastically, and yet my home was much the same. I went to watch my father work in the clinic and became acutely aware of how little he had to treat people who were severely ill. I saw a young, otherwise healthy girl who had a bout of diarrhea for a few days. By the time her mother made it to the clinic on foot, the little child was extremely dehydrated. The clinic had no IV fluids. She was too sick to drink. She died from dehydration. I watched my dad help her mother strap the lifeless little girl's body on her mother's back to start a long walk back home with her baby girl. I went to the district hospital and saw women laying on trash bags on cement floors, delivering their babies. Because the hospital was overcrowded, understaffed, and under-resourced, I saw women hemorrhaging while on the floor holding their newborn babies, and there was no blood to give them because the blood bank was empty. I realized that little girl that went home dead could have been me. I realized that the women laying on the floor, dying while giving birth, was the future that was once mine. Somehow God had found me in the midst of all this, chosen me, spared me, and I was now in the United States, a land where my dreams to be a doctor would actually come true. Sorry. That was the birth of the awareness of the plight of my country, and it was also the birth of a new dream. I had to search for my purpose. I started to ask God, why me? What can I do? I'm a stranger in the United States of America with minimal connections. I'm still just a village girl with empty hands. Exodus 3:11, Moses at the burning bush says to God, who am I? And in chapter 4:2, God says to Moses, what's in your hands? And he says, a staff. And the rest of that story is history. All God needed was for Moses to say yes. And God would use whatever Moses had, no matter how small, to fulfill his purpose. I finally decided to just say yes. Here I am. Send me. While in medical school, a group of friends of mine from the Christian Medical and Dental Society group collected a few items. We set up a garage sale and sold $1,500 worth of items. We found a matching donor at the garage sale, and with $3,000, I bought land outside of Salima, Malawi. This was a way to solidify that I was willing to go where God wanted me to go. I had no means, no money, but just believed that one day the land would be used. 7 years later, the land became home to Port Tawera Safe Haven Christian Mission Organization. Port Tawera has a home-style orphanage with 126 children, 12 widowed mamas who have now children to love and care for. We have a school with over 300 children from the village and from the orphanage who wouldn't have access to education. We have a medical clinic that sees 200 to 250 patients a day, and we'll soon be opening a birthing center. We have agricultural programs where we're growing food to feed the kids. We have chicken and goats for meat, which I generally have to convince our visitors not to name the goats because dinner won't taste that good. We will soon construct a high school and start technical training to develop higher educational opportunities. I once heard someone say developing countries are made up of entrepreneurs, visionaries who with social justice and equity have the capacity to be part of the economic development of their countries. This is Joseph to the left. His dream is to own a real sound system one day. For now though, he has created a stereo sound system from electric wires he collected from the trash, an old plastic water tank, and an old radio that he repaired and placed his own wire antenna, and he powers it with a smaller solar panel. He brings this to school. I'm not sure the teachers are too excited about loud music at recess. To the right are a group of young men who've somehow figured out how to create a pool table from sticks and mud. This is the creativity and innovative minds that I see in all the children that we have at Portaria, because that's also what God saw in me, even when I thought I was forgotten. As the project grew and the demands of the finances increased, I found myself overwhelmed once again about the responsibility it has taken. I kind of asked myself, I've been grown since I was 10. Why can't I just be normal? Why can't I just be less responsible? I looked at God and asked how he wanted me to do this. I reminded God that I have no roots in the United States, that I have no financial resources from Malawi, and I was definitely not Oprah. The fear of failure became real as the burdens increased. Through an amazing friendship that could only be driven by God, I met Mike Novolio, who was raising money to repair wells in Malawi by climbing Kilimanjaro through Child Legacy International Organization. What are the chances that Mike and I would meet in the woodlands? Mike used the vision that God had given him to support his ministry, which he had done successfully for years, to empower me to find a way to create visibility for Portaria. In 2016, along with my friend Mike and Clean Water Climb, I used the feet that had walked and run many miles in Tonje and the stamina that helped me carry 40 pounds of water on my head to climb and summit Kilimanjaro for my fellow Malawians. It was the hardest thing I had ever done, but the most physical expression I could give to God, that I was willing for him to use me and whatever I had in my hands, however way he saw fit, to benefit my people in Malawi. This platform has been transforming, for better or worse. I've done it 3 times, and I'm about to go back again for the 4th time this summer. I'm truly grateful for the feet and hands and stamina to do this, and truly grateful for my friend Mike and Jennifer, who instead of choosing the success of just their own ministry alone, decided to use what he had in his hand to help me make my own waves. And here's Mike. When I look at my life, it is filled with a series of people who used what was in their hands to fulfill God's purpose in my life. My parents' selfless love for the service of others, Donna's financial resources and access to higher education, and Mike's success with his own ministry used to empower mine. Life takes us through different seasons, but God will use each one of us when we think we have nothing to give. David was a shepherd boy who had a sling that God used to take down a giant. Ruth was a hard-working widow who had lost everything, was in a strange land, gleaning in a field for food, and later became the owner of that field through marriage to Boaz. We serve a living God, a God of unmerited favor, who turns things around for his glory. Nothing is impossible with God. If you're hearing this call this weekend, don't worry about what you don't have in your hands, because God already knows what you have. Just say yes.